Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Shekar Krishnan, and I'm running for City Council here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst. It's so good to see everyone. And I just want to thank you all for coming out to our policy discussions and community talks that we've had every Thursday night. It's been really great to see everyone coming together to talk with some of the foremost frontline activists and advocates and on each different issue that we've talked about and impacted communities too. It's what makes these discussions so meaningful. And also what's been great to see with our campaign too, picking up so much momentum and support is from everyone like you who's been involved in different ways, participating in conversations, reflecting on these policy issues. Each and every one of these issues affects our city in so many different ways. As I always say, where you live, where your home is, affects everything else around you. And home, I don't just mean a place of shelter, I mean a place of belonging, a place of inclusion. Where you are affects everything else around you. Where you live affects your schools, affects your modes of transportation, affects your access to healthcare, your access to employment or lack thereof. And so it's good to have these conversations to think about what are all the different issues that we face as a community in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, and as a city, especially as we come out of this pandemic. So I encourage you all to get involved with our campaign, join our efforts too. You can visit our website at www.voteshekar.com and check out our platforms there too, including our education platform, which is tonight's topic. I'm really, really excited to have a set of three awesome panelists with us today to talk about some of the most urgent and pressing issues affecting our public schools. Public school, I say this as a public school parent myself, public school education is the heart of our city and of our communities. And our future literally depends on our public schools and our public school education and how much we invest in it. We must be doing all we can to fight for public education. But right now, one of the things that we see is that we've been denied so much in resources for our public schools. Despite court orders under the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit and litigation at the state level, so much, billions of dollars are owed to our New York City public schools, which have not come in yet and that we need so desperately. Two, we need to ensure that in all decisions about our schools, we are actually centering the voices of educators and of parents and of children, of course, too, right? Because our families, our teachers are what make our public school system so special. And the voices that matter most as the voices most impacted by decisions made by City Hall or by the Department of Education directly affect our teachers and our parents and families. And we saw that during the pandemic itself too. Questions about reopenings of school, remote learning. What needs to be happening is we need to make sure that in these processes, we're centering the voices of parents and teachers, and that we're also centering the needs of multilingual learners, of students with disabilities, of homeless students as well. These are the kinds of shifts that need to be happening in perspective in our education, not a top-down approach to education, but really a bottom-up inclusive one. Now, it is simply true that our New York City public schools are overwhelmingly composed of Black and Brown students. But when it comes to looking at our curriculum, when it comes to looking at the tools and materials that are used to teach our students, oftentimes many of our students don't see themselves or their identities reflected back in those materials. I know growing up for me too, how important it would have been to see people with my skin color who look like me or with my heritage in what I read, in the materials that we thought about in our schools too and reflected on as students, and how much that would have impacted me. And so many students around our city have similar stories too. The question really being, how do we build an environment for our students that is inclusive, that is supportive, that is restorative, and not punitive? Because in our systems, when we have schools set up with metal detectors, with suspension rates, all of these punitive practices actually affect Black and Brown students at overwhelming rates. Our schools need to be safe spaces for our students, for our families, for teachers, in a nurturing environment for those to learn, where students can really reflect on themselves and where education is for the education of the whole child. Now, we're going to talk about all those things today, specifically in terms of culturally responsive education or culturally responsive sustaining education. I think it's CRE or CRSE. And we have our experts today who can tell you far more about that. But I'm so excited today to have with us Natasha Capers, who is an incredible parent organizer and advocate for educational justice in our city. Jan-Kristof Louis-Mansano, who's a teacher and school counselor as well, for whom issues on CRE have been part of his work and his teaching in his schools too. and Jeremy Chan-Kraushar, who's done so much work as well in our public schools too, around implicit bias and culture responsive education. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so excited to hear from you. And we'll start out with Natasha. With all the incredible work you do, Natasha, in our city every day, can you give us a sense of, when we talk about culturally responsive education, or CRE, what does that exactly mean? What are we talking about? And let's put all those fancy words aside and break it down. What does that mean for our students and for our schools?
Yes, so thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. Hey, y'all. Hey, I'm Natasha. For tonight, I'm using they, them, and he pronouns. And so I encourage all of you to say your pronouns when you introduce yourselves as well. And also, that is a part of cultural responsiveness. It is a part of our practice. So that way we can show up and be our full selves. And so people know who we are and how to address us properly. So what is culturally responsive education? I feel like I've been asking and answering this question for like several years, and it's still amazing for me. So culturally responsive education has a few different definitions, but one of the easiest ways to think about it is that our schools, the environments in which they are in, so like the school environment, the curriculum, books, that they should be reflective of students, the student body who is there. And does it have to be, well, I have 15 Bangla speaking students and I have 10 white students. It doesn't have to be an exact science, but there has to be more of a closer range of who is in the classroom and how we are educating them, right? And so also thinking about ways in which culturally responsiveness does not work if you are not fully and transformatively engaging families, engaging community, engaging elders, right? It's all of those things. It's the practices and who greets us when you walk into a school, who is hired to be teachers in our school, who are we showing children can be educators. In our school system, 85% of the student population identifies as Black, Latinx, or Asian. Yet most teachers in our school system are white, mostly white women, over 60%. And that is a national average. It's the same thing with our books. Oh, once again, 15% of the student population is white, yet 85% of the authors of books in our student schools from 3K to 8th grade are written by white people, or especially white women, right? And so that is not a proper reflection. It's also not a proper reflection because even when we break down what are those books that students are looking at, students are more likely to see inanimate objects on the cover of books than they are able to see themselves if they're a student of color. So if you are an Asian student, an Asian girl, you most likely will go through 3K to 8th grade and never see yourself reflected on the cover of a book or be the main character in a book that you are reading in your school, right? And so it does not reflect the communities that our students are in. It doesn't reflect real life. Most of the time, it doesn't reflect the lives that they're living. Most of the books that students read that do reflect people of color are usually in survival stories or trauma-induced stories, right? They survived war, they survived famine, they survived trauma, they survived slavery, right? They survived the civil rights movement, but it's never really books steeped in joy and laughter and childhood, right? So think about all of the books that students read that are just about play or imagination or the mystical, right? Those usually center white characters, right? So our students don't get the opportunity to fully see themselves, nor does our curriculum tell full truths, right? So, and that is a really important thing. And so a really easy way to think about this is Christopher Columbus, right? And I know this example gets used a lot because it's just such a glaring example. The same thing with how we talk about our founding fathers, right? We talk about them as if they're on a pedestal, but we don't talk about them as slaveholders. We don't talk about them as abusive. We don't talk about them as rapists because they were. If you are having sex with a slave who cannot give consent, that is not sex, right? And we don't talk about that. We don't complicate the ways in which we do learning. And that has to end, because we live in a, like, we act as if indigenous people are invisible, except for maybe one day out of the year, but yet we uphold stories of Thanksgiving of being a peaceful celebration, which has time and time again been disproven as a lie, right? And so we have to get back to teaching truthful histories, because one of the pertinent things about school is that it helps us to develop a world view. So this is why it's not just a thing that Black students need or Latinx students need. Why it's a thing that all of our students need, right? It's because it helps us to develop a worldview. And if the only time we read about India, or we read about countries in Africa, or we read about countries in South America are steeped in war, are steeped in poverty, steeped in drug use, then we are not giving students a proper world view, because that is not the actual world. Is it part of the world? Yes. But we could also tell those exact same stories about the places our children live right now. Right? We can tell those exact same stories. So let's give them fuller stories. Let's complicate it, because our children do understand that what we are learning is incomplete and that it centers the wrong things. And so at its heart, culturally responsiveness is getting back to the humanity of students, the humanity of their teachers, pushing us all to really center that and to teach from a place of honesty, of really decentering whiteness, and get into a place where we are reflective of the world as a whole.
I think you put that so powerfully, Natasha, too, and how the work ahead of us in doing that is really undoing a lot of these systemic institutional issues that are really within our education system that we have to really undo and unlearn, right? So one of the questions I have for you too is to talk a little bit about, well, let me ask one more question first, and I'll go to that one. My other question is, when we talk about these issues of inclusivity and cultural responsiveness, we often talk about it in the context of also the education of the whole child. And from a standpoint of restorative or supportive academic environment. What does that exactly mean? What does it mean to say the education of the whole child? What kind of environment are we trying to build and why?
So when we think about educating the whole child, we're not just saying, it's moving away from this idea that students sit in seats, we just cram math into their brains and that's it. That's our only job, right? Because this, the job of education and of schools is to, one, educate children, but also to see about the well-being of children and to help to form them into good adults, right? And so seeing about the whole child means making sure, like, yes, that they're getting strong academic, high quality academics, right? Often there's an argument that culturally responsiveness is soft and mushy, and it's actually not. It's actually much harder because it incorporates multiple points of view, and you actually have to get to harder root concepts, right? But it also takes into account the social and emotional supports that are needed for students, regardless of what they're going through, that we all need social and emotional support so that we're seeing about the emotional health of a child. We're also seeing that they understand what conflict is and how to resolve it. When we are in community with one another, conflict arises. It's actually one of the ways in which we know that we are building together. We are going to butt heads. We're going to disagree. We're not always going to get along. And it's actually how you can tell if honesty is in play, right? But what none of us, for the most part, have ever been taught is how do you rectify conflict? Yep. And how do you do it in a way that leaves both parties whole, healed, and happier, right? So that you understand how you harmed me and I can accept that and take accountability, right? So when we talk about restorative practice, practices. That's where that is centered in, that we understand how to take care of conflict. And lastly, that we are actually seeing to the well-being of students' families, that we have transformative parent engagement, that we have language interpretation, that we translate documents for families, that we are making sure that families with students with IEPs know all their options and know what is actually in those IEPs, that we are actually taking care of the understanding, and we are listening to families about what they want to see in their school environments. Because if we don't take care of families, then once again, we are not taking care of the child, right? So often I've gone into schools and I've heard teachers like bash and badmouth parents, and they will do it in front of students and then wonder why students don't like them. And I'd be like, well, if you talked about my mama and then want me to be nice to you, well, you just made that impossible. Because I'm from Brownsville, I'm from the hood. You talk about my mama, we fit in a fight. That's right? And most of us know this. You cannot talk about my mama. But because somehow you are an adult, and because you have a title as a teacher, you somehow get to talk about my family, you get to talk about my mother, and I cannot rebut that. Right? And so therefore, we are not actually taking care of that child, because bashing a child's family is bashing them. Right? And that is showing that I don't actually care and love and want to take care of you. So that's what we mean when we say taking care of the whole child. We want to make sure that the school environment is steeped in lovingness, that it is steeped in understanding, and that the adults in that building are also being supported. So teachers need support, administrators need support. Everyone needs to kind of be held to account, but also held to also be learning. Everyone in the school building should be forever learners, and we should all be learning and shifting and growing.
Thanks, Natasha. And what work, do you want to speak a little bit to the work that you and others in the movement right now are doing to make sure in specific ways that we're bringing culturally inclusive, culturally responsive education into our public school system too?
Yes, absolutely, because it's my favorite thing to talk about.
That's right. That's what I wanted to
ask. So some of the work that we are doing right now is that we are holding this chancellor and mayor to task, right? It is time for new curriculum in New York City. One, the curriculum we have is just old and outdated. And it's time that the New York City, who is the largest school district in the country, uses its buying power to force publishing companies and curriculum companies to do right by students. And so they should be building curriculums and book lists and hiring authors who are of color, who are of diverse backgrounds, who have diverse stories to tell, but that are building curriculum that is culturally responsive to our communities. We also are holding them to task to continue to train teachers on how to use the curriculum they have and transform it to make the tweaks that are needed for their specific classrooms. There's never going to be a thing that you buy out of the box that is going to be perfect for all of New York City. That's just impossible, because that's also not being responsive. A thing I put on the box can't be responsive to 1.1 million children, and not in a city as diverse as ours. But we can have something that is way better than what we have now, that is much closer to 100%, but then have our teachers really trained well in how to take what they are given and make the necessary tweaks, make the necessary adjustments, so that they can put their ooh la la and their Lowry's and their sasson all over it to make it just right.
That's really well said. Thank you, Natasha, for saying that and explaining that so well too. Jan, let's turn to you next. You're a teacher. You've taught in our school system. You're now a school counselor too. And maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience. I know you started out in a school in East New York, which is also what happened with that school. Also, is a bit of a story about the disinvestment in our public schools too. So I want you to talk a little bit about that too, and how you've brought CRE into your classroom and your school as a teacher and a counselor too.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. So as my name is Jan-Kristof Louis-Mansano. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently a school counselor at Arts and Letters 305 United in Bed-Stuy. And prior to that, I was a school teacher in PS 345 in East New York. Now I was a fifth grade teacher at the time, and my first year, I was beyond nervous. I think the kids actually scared me because I was so worried about how I was going to actually communicate with them, how to make sure that I put them first, and it was a lot of work that I had to do internally, essentially by understanding that there's a time when I had to lean in and when to step back also. That if a child, that to be able to be okay with a child telling me that I'm wrong, and especially understanding that their life doesn't just revolve around the classroom, that there is a lot going on outside also. So my first year, I had a packed classroom of 32 children, to a point where even moving around the classroom, I had to move to the side a little bit. And with the 32 kids, I was only given 10 laptops that were over 10 years old that I had to share with 32 kids.
Wow.
So with that, it was just okay. So this is my first year, and I didn't get a lot of training in terms of, well, I mean, I went to Brooklyn College for education, which was fantastic. However, I kept finding out that a lot of the things that I learned in the textbook, a lot of it was not applicable in the classroom. I needed to learn as I went. So I was literally learning every single day. And the classroom, I had a lot of students from a lot of Muslim countries. I had a lot of students from Hispanic countries. I had a lot of students from Asian countries. So the history was literally happening in our classroom. When the travel ban was passed, three of my students could not see their families because of the travel ban. Seven of my girls were also homeless. So it was a lot going on in the classroom where I was given a curriculum and I was thinking, okay, there's no way I can teach this if I'm not applying what the kids are going through. So what ended up happening is this was more work, but I feel that it was necessary. So what ended up happening is a lot of the work that I did, it was looking through a lot of different resources to see what I can apply. The principal came to visit my classroom once and asked, and when she saw all the textbooks that the DOE sent us were sitting in a corner and they were kind of being used as like bookends, or dust was picking up on them. And she was asking, is this being used? And it's like, oh, I mean, no, because when you look at it, and I think it's because of my upbringing, because I grew up in Haiti. And I think what I end up realizing is that the education system in this country is very US centered. While when I grew up in Haiti, I learned it from a world perspective.
Very
So
true.
when I learned world history, if we were learning about Vietnam, it was Vietnam centered. If we learned about Somalia, it was Somalia centered. If we were learning about India, it was India centered. But when I moved to this country in high school at 13 years old, I remember very well when I saw my program card and I saw social studies, I got excited because I thought, oh, so it's not just memorizing the dates. It means that I'm actually going to learn social studies, like understanding what why these decisions were made. That never happened. It was just another memorization of dates, and it was always all this praise of how much it was this white savior mentality over and over again with each story. And I kept thinking, okay, even the story of Thanksgiving, I in Haiti, we learned the real story of Thanksgiving. And then when I moved here, it was a completely different story. It's like, wait a second, this is not what I learned. I remember smallpox blankets, not a turkey, but I digress. Um, so from there, with I decided to put that in my classroom. I said, you know what, to there are kids from all over the world in this room. I need to let their voices be heard. If we're talking about amplifying their voices, then those voices need to be heard. So in addition to looking for different resources, I took the kids out once a month. I did a trip once a month to different parts around the city, because over and over again, they kept telling me how New York City it was this white city. So even when I took them to see, we went to see Cats on Broadway. And when I told them that it was in Times Square, they said how, oh, that white place. So because of that, I decided to take them a little earlier. We had lunch in Times Square and they were running around the stairs and everything. And it was such a great time. They actually enjoyed that more than Cats, as they have, but that's another point. Um, but my second year, a different thing started happening. What we kept noticing is that the principal started getting more and more worried, and she kept telling us that we're losing a lot of kids. And I didn't understand what was going on. because as our I mean, our fifth grade classrooms were packed, our fourth grade classrooms were packed, but then by the time we got to third grade, we went from four full classrooms in the fifth grade with about 32 kids to fourth grade about the same thing. And in third grade, it went down to four classroom, but about 20 something kids in each classroom. And then second grade and the first grade, it kept dropping and dropping and dropping to the point that we literally had to recruit kids to come for pre-K. And it was one family during parent teacher conference who asked me if I knew what she gave me a piece of paper that somebody gave to her. It was a voucher that was essentially where they're trying to buy out her building, but to give her that, they were trying to get them to move in different places.
Wow.
But it wasn't just places in the city; it was places out of New York. Like some of these vouchers were sending them all the way out in Pennsylvania. So I kept asking the teachers, and they were just like, "Has anyone seen this? Like, do you know what this is?" And a lot of us were not sure what was going on. Now, mind you, this was the same year that the ICE vans were going around our school also. So there was a point where one of the third grade teachers, one of the kids stopped coming, and come to find out that ICE had picked him up along with his entire family. So because of that, that created all this fear within our families. So that made us lose even more people. So because of that, with the way the public school system works, because we lost so many kids, that means the school itself was losing money. So because it was losing money, that means they had to get rid of staff. So the way it is with the DOE is that the last ones in or the first ones out. So the second year, we actually lost 12 staff members, including myself. So what was hard that year is that this was in June. I remember June started with me getting a letter from the principal talking, saying how with my observation and everything, it was highly effective with the kids' results and everything. And I was on cloud nine. And then 2 weeks later, I get another letter telling me that I was no longer part of the 345 staff. I was crushed. I was crushed. I was walking around the hallways. I felt like nothing. I went back to my room. I was crying, and I was trying to kind of understand because I just put so much heart into this, and I can't believe that this is how I was gonna go. So the that year also, when the PTA came to find out, they were asking about what plans were gonna happen next year. And I told them, well, I don't think I'll be coming back because the school lost money. Now, mind you, these are low income families. The families got together to put money together to pay my salary so I can stay in the school.
Wow.
That took me somewhere else. I just thought, I can't believe this. These are people that can barely make the rent, yet
Yeah.
they believed in me so much that they were putting money together to keep me at the school. It moved me so much. And then even at, in graduation, because of that, the principal was telling us that, that's not something that's possible with our school. So at graduation, I ended up sharing with everybody that I was going to leave because I had to find work somewhere else. And that's when I was able to find the counseling job at Arts and Letters. But as I still keep in touch with the teachers at the school, they're still telling me that it has gotten worse since I left. It is not just, and it's a lot when it comes to understanding. And the thing is, I knew I had an understanding of how budget affected schools, but when it happened so close to home and the way it affected our families, our kids, like that year, so much was going on with between the ICE vans and the, with the families being moving elsewhere. It just became clearer and clearer how important it is to invest in our families and invest in our schools. And I'm a product of public school. I went to Edward R. Murrow High School. I went to Brooklyn College. So these are schools that, when I think about it, is, saying that there's such a backlash sometimes around when it comes to public education. It's saying, well, that's failing, that's not going to go anywhere. But granted, my freshman year was not the best school. But when I went to Murrow for sophomore, junior, and senior year, I I relive those moments with joy. I really do. I was not this outspoken. I was shy. I could barely speak, but public school gave me the voice that I needed. It really did because there was so much diversity in the building, and I had that my former social studies teacher is actually the current principal at Murrow. So to hear that, I was so excited. I thought, oh, this is great. So he's bringing back. So he was able to implement everything he had in the classroom to implement those voices, to amplify those voices, and now apply it to the entire school building. So this is something that Saul Bruckner did before. He was the first principal that started with the school, and we gave him a standing ovation when we graduated because he was he was like a grandfather to us. Like he cared so much for us. Like it was all you saw was just like this old man that would just walk slowly around the building, but so caring. And I met him because I fell on the second floor with my books for all over the place, like typical. You think it was a Degrassi episode, and this man got on his knees to pick all this stuff up for me
Wow.
and introduce himself in a school of 5,000 people. So when I saw that, with that growing up in Murrow and what was happening in East New York, it was so much that told me that we need to invest in this so much.
Yep.
And at the same time, the curriculum has to change. Like too many times when I had to teach 9/11 in the textbook was not what I experienced when I was here in 9/11. This book did not address the amount of Islamophobia that was in the city when this happened.
Yep. That's
The
so
amount
true.
of people the amount of Muslim people that were attacked, it never addressed that. All it said was that this country was attacked and then we retaliated and we won this war. And it's like, no, that's not how I remember it. And the kids that we were able to really, and the kids even at some point they asked me, they said, can you tell us like what that was like? And as I was talking to them, I was like, wow, I guess I haven't really gotten over this. And I started getting emotional in the classroom as I spoke to them. But then I started realizing more and more by letting myself be more vulnerable, they got to see the human side of me. Like a lot of times when I think of my teachers when I was younger, and I know this mentality goes with a lot of them too. I used to think that, our teachers like come out of the wall and then they go back into the wall at the end of the day. And that was it. They didn't have a life outside. But the kids got to see, I got to let them see who I was. I got to see them that I am this Black person, I am this gay person. My husband was in the area at the time, and he came to visit us at the school. And when he came to visit us, two of the kids grabbed him from the front door and brought him to the classroom and said, "Mr. K's husband is here." And all the kids got up and gave him this huge hug. And he looked at me and asked me if I had planned all this. I was like, I did not do this. And it just made me realize more and more that something I did naturally by just being positive and affirmative and pushing their kids' voices, it just emanated out of me to the point that it emanated out of them.
Mhm.
Like I was able to create this safe space without really, I don't know, it just happened, honestly. And other teachers would ask about this, and I just thought, I don't know, I think just the way I do things on a daily basis, I just did the same with the kids. And I think too many times we like to see kids as this, like, oh, they don't know anything, just dump this knowledge into them. But I got to sit down and I got to listen to them and I got to understand, okay, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I should just stop talking and just let them speak. And they ran a lot of the lessons. Even one time we did this immigration lesson where we got food from different restaurants all over the city. We got some Russian food, we got some Polish food, we got some Indian food. And even going to Central Park with the girls that I had from Yemen. When we went to get some food at Central Park and the vendor started talking, I didn't recognize the language. And then one of the girls, Liao, she turned to me with this bright eye and she said, "He's speaking my language." I said, "Okay, so then help us out, get us some food." But it was just so amazing to see her so happy to see this. And I think also the fact that I wouldn't shame her for using the language. I wouldn't shame her for just being her.
So true.
That's what too many times, and it comes right down to sometimes as simple as just learning how to pronounce their names. And it's not that much of an effort to do that, and if we can take our time to really look at people's names and just say, okay, this is how I'm supposed to pronounce it, and then get to know their culture. And like you said, it's and also at a school at East New York, I was the only Black male teacher in that building, which doesn't make any sense. And all we had, and most of the teachers were a lot of teachers driving in from Long Island. The school counselor in the building, Trump's inauguration, we were playing it in the auditorium, and she says out loud, "This is why I voted for this man."
Wow.
In a school that is full of immigrant children, with a man who is talking about sending immigrants back home, and this is the school counselor saying this. And I just thought, this can't be happening right now. This has to be an alternate. I can't make this up. So in addition, it was, even the math teacher in my grade, she kept saying that, oh, I don't let the kids know which car is mine because I don't want something to happen. Meanwhile, when I did drive to the school, the kids would always say, oh, that's Mr. K's car. We got to watch out for it. I was like, this is like, we so many of them judged the kids so quickly. Like we didn't get a chance to get to really know them, to let them be who they are. And it's something now as a counselor at my current school, I told myself, you know what, since I'm a bit higher now in terms of administration, I want to make sure that those voices are still amplified. And my goal is to eventually become a principal. And my thing is I'm glad that I went from teaching to counseling to this, because I got to see the academic aspect of it. I got to see the social emotional aspect of it. And I got to hear from the teachers as a colleague, and I got to hear from the teachers as a counselor. So it's all of this together that can honestly help me become an effective principal, because I can amplify the kids' voices. I can amplify the teachers' voices. And like you said, Natasha, I can amplify the families' voices also, because we can't do this without them. Yep. And if we don't realize that, we're going to lose the kids, and it's going to be completely against the very nature of education, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jan. That was powerful to hear. And I really, just the stories you told, the way you put it too, I've watched your work we went to college together. So, I've seen you since then too, and all the work that you're doing, bumped into you on the streets in Williamsburg, and, in my work in North Brooklyn, and yours too. So it's powerful to hear what you're saying too. And a couple of things come to mind, and I want to ask Jeremy too in a second. But one thing you said is just the systematic disinvestment from a public school in East New York, as students were going to other schools, to charter schools, and the way in which it siphons money from our public schools at their expense. Charter schools are expanding, and the state is investing in charter schools, and how that could be allowed under our watch in New York State too is atrocious to me, because all those dollars are dollars that, while we're still struggling to get money that's owed to us in our public schools. And to hear that story put in East New York, and that was the second point I wanted to make too, this is happening in East New York, where I know it too, because my colleagues and I did a lot of work and represented the East New York Coalition fighting against the rezoning of East New York, because it's one of the poorest communities in the city. We represented so many tenant associations in East New York, but we knew this rezoning coming in would displace so many of the Black and brown families and of the undocumented families we represented. And we fought against it, and it happened. But you're talking about rezoning, one of de Blasio's rezonings, rezoning one of the poorest communities of color in the city, to bring in, to gentrify further, to displace residents who have lived there for so long, while the public school that's there is losing dollars and losing students. And we're bringing in these new resources, not for the students who are here, but to rezone it for new residents who are coming in, and displacing those who have been there for so long, when East New York was forgotten by so many. And I just think that that connection is so important to make, because it's like Dr. King says too, right? Segregated housing leads to segregated schools, segregated modes of transportation, everything ties to home. And I just think that the way in which we're this jarring reality of our schools losing so much in resources while we're rezoning these same neighborhoods, but not bringing any resources for those who are here, just tells you how much our failed housing policies have such a harmful impact also on so many other of our policies, especially our schools, and how these issues are connected too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I did have, and I also, you're right about, how much pronouncing a student's name can make such a difference too. I always joke that I would know when the teacher got to my name in the in the attendance list, because she would stop and and I was like, okay, that's me. Misbutcher my name, but that's me. But I think that that's very real, right? That ability to be able to pronounce a student's name, connect with their culture, that doesn't happen often enough. So I do have one more question for you, but I want to go to Jeremy first, and then maybe I'll open up the questions with my question for you, Jan. But Jeremy, I wanted to hear a little bit from you too. You've done a lot of work. Please introduce yourself and your pronouns too, and tell us a little bit about what is the role, what can the city council do right now, and what can the city more generally do right now to really fight for and implement in a meaningful way culturally responsive and inclusive education in our schools? This is the work that you do every single day. So where do we stand right now, and what is the work ahead of us, and how can we all support that effort?
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Shekar. Jan, Natasha, it's amazing just to hear your perspectives and the wealth of experience that you have. Hope everyone else is doing well right now in our Zoom worlds and staring at screens, and encourage you all to like shake it out and make sure you're taking breaks. I know I need it as well. But these issues are incredibly important to me and so many others. My name is Jeremy Chan-Kraushar. My pronouns are he and him. I'm half Chinese, half white, Jewish, New York American, and I'm an education advocate and also lead implicit bias workshops, anti-racism workshops. And I was a former teacher. I taught in Brooklyn, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade students a while back now. And so, yeah, it's a big question, Shekar. I think one of the big things I want to say, connecting to both what Natasha and Jan mentioned, right? CRSE or CRE, they seem like they've been a buzz over the last couple years. If you're in the education world, you're like, CRE everything. You talk to educators, how do I become more CRE? One thing I wanted to add too is that, this didn't just come out of nowhere. This is based out of academic research, predominantly by Black women in the field for the last 3-4 decades. It's become more mainstreamed over the last few years from the sense of urgency that, inequities are still persisting deeply throughout public school systems across the country and in New York City. And that people that are really invested in it know that they have to do that internal work first, right? That yes, representation on books, representation of materials are things that we need to change tomorrow, but that this work really is connected to a theory that talks about cultural competence as a skill that every educator needs to work on. That if teacher prep programs weren't doing that right off the bat, that's something that we need to be investing in. So it's not only cultural competence, the belief that all children can succeed and that we can see students in an asset-minded way, but also this other element that we can't shy away from and that I would argue is actually very popular, this idea that like, what is the goal of education to begin with? And CRSE is all about socio-political consciousness, this idea that, why are we developing human beings to be successful members of society? Part of that should be understanding the world around you and then making the world a better place, right? That education devoid of those concepts, just sort of connects to the status quo, doesn't really talk about addressing inequities. And there's a lot of people, I would say the vast majority of people who've dedicated their life to public education, including at this point, thousands of educators across the city that I've met. This is a wildly popular brand and bent and mindset on education. And it's really about how we can continue investing in it. And so with that, I mean, the last few years, to be very honest, have felt and looked a lot different than it has for, the course of the time at the Department of Ed that I've seen in New York City, where we've invested from the City Council on implicit bias awareness workshops at this point, right? That was the largest scale in the entire country of these types of workshops, a 5-hour foundational workshop. We don't call them trainings, right? Because we want people to know that this is not a one and done. It's not going to feel like your normal, I just did it and I checked the box and now I don't have to think about biases, but really taking folks through and building out a lens that says we have to understand the science, that every single person is biased, every single person has biases, and we have to do our job of understanding our own identities to then understand the ways in which our biases can manifest, in our behaviors, often without intention. And that's something that I got to tell you, people sometimes in workshops will come arms folded. What is this? I don't want to be here. And at the end, so much of the feedback is, we need more of this, right? It's done in a way where we can talk about gender and sexual orientation and ethnicity and race. And it's not that we have shields and barriers up, that we can do it together. And then it builds our capacity as educators and as a school system to do all of the things I think that Jan and Natasha were talking about. Like, how do we incorporate parent and student feedback and voice into everything we do policy-wise? How do we make sure that we're not only funding all of our public schools and fighting for that, but we're not scared to say that we are anti-racist, right? There are folks who right now at this point are immediately, right, their own definitions around what racism is and what anti-racism is. There's sometimes without context, without discussion, why are you even doing that? You say everything is racist, but when we understand the history of race and racism and it's sort of meant to divide, we know that we have to do more work on taking on that label as a school system. So there's a lot of things that I think we could push for. I think we need to keep on some of the amazing work that's happening within development of educators' mindsets and in materials, but also we need to push it further. I don't think we as a system need to not be afraid to educate our staff and students on what race and racism are and all of the isms, because ultimately that is CRSE. That's making sure that students have the ability and confidence that they can make a change in the world. And these things are these isms are the major issues that we're dealing with in everything that we do. So if we ignore them, they will continue.
Thanks so much, Jeremy, for explaining that so well too. And these are, I think Jeremy really highlighted well the work that's ahead of us and the advocacy that's happening now, and how much we need to do as well to really hold our mayor, as Natasha said, City Hall accountable to making sure that they're actually delivering a school system and creating a school system where students, teachers, parents all feel seen in many different ways. That's what education of the whole child ultimately has to be about. So thank you for speaking to that, Jeremy, too. And one thing that I wanted to go back to, I thought Jeremy's points were so excellent on the work ahead of us too. Two things. One is you guys can also, just a reminder, check out our education platforms that really speak to a lot of these issues, from coach-responsive education to bilingual education, public school funding, at our website at www.voteshaker.com, where all of these things are talked about too. I did want to open it up for questions. You can put your questions in the chat. Natasha has left a bunch of great resources, so please check them out. Even talking about the Ocean Hill-Brownsville fight and CRE, this is really great stuff in there. So please look at the chat. You can put your questions in there too. But I'll open it up as more questions come in. For a question I had for Jan, it's something that both Natasha, Jeremy, and Jan all touched. Which is, Jen, yourself too, you talked a bit about it as well, but as a Black gay man and a teacher in our school system, one of the biggest issues we also see too in our public schools is the bullying of LGBTQ youth, right? And trans students, LGBTQ students in particular. Some of our homeless population, one of the highest rates of our homeless are among LGBTQ students as well. Schools can be safe spaces with GSAs and otherwise, but they can also be places of bullying too. So you personally, with your identity too, how have you in the classroom sought to bring in your identity or to find ways to help make sure that LGBTQ students also feel included and feel seen, especially as they're exploring their own identity too?
So for me, I think it started when I think about when, I first realized that I was gay, even though at the time I didn't have a word. I mean, that's when I first, at least I can, as far as I can remember, I was 9 years old, but it was probably before that. But 9 years old, you're talking about fourth, fifth grade, which is what I was teaching at the time. So the dilemma I was facing at the time is because I worked in East New York and I was the only Black male in the school building. I was kind of in that balance between what it means to be Black and what it means to be gay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when I had so many people that were coming, I had so many kids where, they saw me as this father figure because I also looked like them. But the other aspect is I knew the message that they were receiving from home when it came to LGBT community. So it got to a point where, am I going to be an effective teacher if I'm not authentic to myself? At the same time, I kept thinking, okay, if I knew when I was 9 years old, that means that there are probably kids in this classroom right now who are going through the same thing, and they don't know how to voice that. They don't know how to say that, especially in a community like East New York. So what actually got me to come out in the classroom was we were talking about, I think it was we were talking about stories of immigration. And then we talked about people who are different. And then that's when I told the kids that, I am also different, that there are things that are not as typical when it comes to me. And I don't remember what the exact wording was. And when I told them that I was gay, it was probably the first time that I ever got the class to be that quiet. You could hear a pin drop. And I was waiting for a response. There was nothing. And then I just saw the kids staring back at me. And it was one kid in the back of the classroom. And he got up, gave me this very angry look and just said, "No, this isn't right." I just thought, okay, and at first, my first response was, it was when I'm thinking fight or flight. And then my first one was fight. And then I thought, no, don't do that. He's 9. That's not going to go anywhere. So it was a lot to fight back with myself. And I asked him why. And he said, because it's not right, because a man is supposed to be with a woman. And then it was the girl next to him and said, "Says who?" And it says everything. It's what's everything? And then he's just like, I don't know, this is the way it is. And then in my mind, you, that girl, she's going to be president soon. I know that she was phenomenal. The way she questioned him, but he just kept getting angrier. And I realized that. So I just thought, okay. And I explained to them, to the classroom, and I told them my story. And I told them about the friends that I lost. I told them about my mother no longer speaking to me. I told them about, even when I got married, that only my aunt and a couple of cousins came to the wedding. And it created this divide in my family because of this. So all that, it became clear to them and clear to them as to what my life was like. So mind you, after that day, I thought, okay, so what's going to happen next? Is it going to go to their homes, and what's going to happen? At least I had the support of my assistant principal, not the principal, the assistant principal. The principal said that she couldn't save me from the burning fires of hell, and that she wished I hadn't come out. I was like, okay,
Wow.
so you're not going to be on my side. That's fantastic. But the assistant principal was on my side, and strangely enough, the school counselor also. It was a weird dynamic, and I realized that with my friends also, where when it came to being gay, they were more accepting, but when it came to me being black, it wasn't a thing. So it was a big world I had to navigate with that. But in the classroom itself, after that happened, is when the kids, I was wondering if they were talking about it, and it was one of the teaching assistants in a different classroom who told me that, by the way, the kids in the school love you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, because of the way the school was set up, fifth graders had lunch with the second graders. Second graders did after school with the third graders. And I think third graders did something with the first graders. So that means that anything gossipy or rumor like would spread in the building within 20 minutes. So he told me that when he would sit in the lunchroom, how the kids defended me whenever the issue of homosexuality came up. And I just thought, this is coming from the kids. And mind you, though, the staff completely, a lot of the staff changed with me after that. The casual conversation stopped. Any conversation with me was mostly academic. It was just, straight to the point of like, oh, what's this lesson like? I just thought, okay. But then, everyone was talking about their husbands and their wives and what they did at home, but I couldn't even bring that up. So I just left it alone because I told myself, you know what, I'm here for the kids. And about a week later, actually, I made the big mistake of opening my email on the smartboard. So the kids saw all my emails, and then one of them, it was actually that week that I came out, it was the week that I had my engagement pictures done. So one of the kids saw the the subject line in one of the emails, and she says out loud, oh, your engagement pictures are ready. I said, oh, thank you. Let's move on to ELA. And she said no, and the class followed suit. Everybody closed their books and said that they're not gonna do any work until I show them their engagement pictures. And then it was one kid in the back who said, yes, this is what you taught us last week, civil disobedience. I was like, wow, okay. I'm not gonna forget with that one. So I pull up the engagement pictures, and then I was waiting for the response, and it was a lot of oohs and ahs, mostly from the girls. I didn't hear from the boys much, and I thought, okay, this is going to be another discussion. And then it was two of the boys who were looking at the picture and just said, okay, so that means you're getting married, right? And I said, yeah, eventually. And I said, so does that mean you need groomsmen? Like, I probably do. And then they said, okay, so then can we be your groomsmen? It's like, I mean, I'm gonna ask my friends first, not you guys, but and then the boy who said, no, this isn't right last week, he came up very nervous, and I saw him that he kept like twisting his feet and like looking away, and I was waiting for it, and my heart was thumping so loudly I could have sworn I heard it in my throat. And I thought, oh man, this is gonna be bad. And he asked me, are you and Kellen, your husband, are you going to adopt? And I said, we plan to, yes. And then he said, I don't know if this is right, but is it okay if you name your first child after me? I lost it. Wow. I lost it. The kids, I couldn't hold that back. I could not hold that back. And it just showed me that what was happening in my classroom was something that could be possible in every classroom. And the kids themselves also told me, we can't tell our families that you're gay, because if we do, they're going to remove us from your class. So they knew how their families were. But the fact that you had these young minds that were able to make that difference between their families and be able to make something on their own, to be able to create their own world that way, it gave me that much hope again. It just told me the kids are not the problem. We're the ones that are ruining them. We are the ones that keep doing this to them, where like you see it in pre-K and kindergarten. Like when it comes to conflicts, kids are ready to talk about it. They're ready to resolve it. But as adults, because of so much history, so much trauma, so much misinformation that we've received, we put this on our kids, and that same cycle just repeats over and over and over again. But it's about breaking that cycle. But for us to break that cycle, we have to start doing some internal reflection ourselves. That means also acknowledging how much we've contributed to the racism, how much we've contributed to the bias. And even when it comes, and the thing is, it's not just, when it comes to a race issue, it's a class issue also.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of times when it comes to like that distance that we see. I've sat down with Black families who are middle class and upper class, and some of the things they say sometimes, it's like, this is problematic. Like, do you realize what you're saying? Like, you're literally creating an even greater divide. But bringing that up is where, it just told me more and more as to how much I can do as a person, how much I can do when it comes to showing that example and creating that safe space. And that same group of kids, I keep in touch with some of them, and some of the families still talk to me, and they tell me like that same message that I had in the classroom, they're still talking about it in their middle school, also in East New York. And they're still talking about when it comes to being gay, they're still talking about being trans, they're still talking about all this stuff when it comes to all these things that we're afraid to talk to our kids about, but they're ready to learn. They really are. We just like to censor so much, but we don't realize how much we're holding back from them by censoring them so much. Like if we took the time to give them the voice and actually have the conversation with them and have them realize that, what, maybe I can learn from this child also, because they're seeing it from a different lens than I have. My lens has been cloudy for a very long time, no pun intended, but it's just theirs hasn't been yet. So maybe we can just take the time and just realize, what, let me listen and see what that is. But that ends up being questioning our very identity. And that's something that we like to hold on to a lot. And it brings up so many insecurities. And it goes back to, the mental health aspect that has been put in the back burner so much when it comes to us and how we deal with a lot of things. So it's a lot of layers that need to be addressed. And I think that's something that I can honestly say that I was able to learn and educate myself about when I was in college. Having gone through the academic setting with my bachelor's, and then realizing, what, I won't be an effective teacher until I know my kids emotionally and socially. And I think once we're able to really address that, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And I think that's why a lot of people don't want to do it also. But if we all just took that time step by step and, hold people accountable, make sure that there is a just system, make sure that all the voices are actually amplified, that you really hear from everyone's perspective, that's the only way we can actually get to where we need to be.
Thank you, Jan. That was beautiful to hear and so powerful too. And I think your point about how much it's us as adults that our kids start out with the eyes wide open, the world in front of them, and so many of our own biases and internal prejudices are what then shape their mind, as opposed to us learning from them and keeping their minds in the open state that is as they're born that way. But it's us as adults that really do so much damage too. Thank you so much, Jen. Natasha and Jen, another question here that I think you both be able to answer well too, from Anna Lee, is what advice would you give to parents, especially Natasha, who want to push school administrators to embrace and invest in CRT, CRE, especially when the principal administrators are resistant to it and are more focused on assessments and test outcomes?
So one, I will point them to the CRE Hub. There's a link in the chat that I dropped earlier. The CRE Hub has been curated by NYU and really has pulled together a lot of research and data and policy papers and reports, including reports that we've put out about the positive effects of culturally responsive education, right? Because we are in a data-driven world, everybody's like, I want to see the data, as if I need to give you data about why a Latinx girl should be able to read a book that reflects her and her community, right? Like, I don't know, I shouldn't have to defend why that should be, but we have to, and there are numbers there in all of those reports, including one of the reports I dropped earlier called Diversity White Curriculum, and it really looks at the curriculum and book list from 3K, from 3K to 8th grade. And so that's also a great resource for them. Also, the CRE scorecard and toolkit. So we work together with NYU to answer the great question, well, how do you prove that the curriculum is racist? So we developed this scorecard, and really what it does is it takes a unit of study, a unit of curriculum. So no, you can't just take a book or a reading. You have to take a full unit of curriculum, and you use the scorecard to evaluate it. And it asks questions about, are there multiple points of view? Does the story only have, do the books in the story in the unit only have Black or people of color as sidekicks? Are the girls in the story or women in the story there to be saved or rescued, right? It really gets deep in there. And it also examines the teacher materials, because teacher materials should be giving additional guidance. And most of the time it doesn't. It falls way flat. So I would say bring those to them as resources to be able to do. I will also say you can reach out to us, and I'm going to put you in contact, and I'll drop my email, because if you are a parent and you have a group of other parents that want to score the curriculum yourself, you can also do that. We've done curriculum scorecard parties with families across the city over the last few years, including monolingual Spanish-speaking families. So there are ways to translate the materials, translate books, and so that way families of any language can do this work. And when you really, and the tool is so comprehensive that it really allows you to have deep and really thoughtful conversation about what really is in the curriculum that we are putting in front of children.
Thanks, Natasha. Jeremy, you want to add something too?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think it's a great question because it speaks to the difficulty of this task, right? Like there's mindsets around what is culturally responsive education, and what does it mean I have to do to change my practice to get there, as if it's something that could change overnight, right? This really is about adopting a mindset and developing all of the people in an organization at sort of working on that mindset. And so I think that ultimately, right, there's a lot of leadership that is trying their absolute best. There's a lot of directives from on high. And I think what has to change, what's already changing, but has to change even more so in the future, is accountability structures, right? If there's certain ways that individual schools or districts, right, or principals are assessed on their effectiveness, if the accountability structures don't change to reflect limiting or minimizing disparities that exist, or the representation of materials, if that's not showing up in the ways that we have conversations about feedback, how we're improving, and it's just an opt-in, it's just folks who sort of have that consciousness, they want to do it, then there's a lot of mixed signals that we're giving leaders around what they should be doing, right? If we also have this misconception that CRSE is separate from academic achievement, that you have to choose one or the other. And a lot has been written on this. It's a notion that you have to just teach math and English, and there's subjects that are devoid of integration of concepts around consciousness, culture, and identity. We know that that's very much not true. There's a lot of research that says that pretty straightforwardly. It's just that for a lot of people, that's not how their own education was, and that's not how the systems that have been in place hold folks accountable. And so I think the way to do that is to keep, like Natasha says, informing yourself around what these things are, having these conversations about what the concepts are and how they'll play out. And then it's really pushing elected officials and leadership to start thinking about revisiting our accountability structures.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. And I see these are really, but such a powerful discussion. And I really enjoyed it so much too. And just looking at everyone who's and reactions, people from who've stayed on too. It's been such an informative and moving discussion. So I've noticed that we're coming close to the hour, so I don't want to keep everyone on too late, but I did want to ask just one final question that maybe Jan could, it was a question from Lena that I saw. Let me see. Oh, my question is for Jan. How do you create a safe space for your students facing hardships at home? You mentioned some were facing homelessness, for example.
Honestly, from what the kids told me, mind you, this was when we had actually this big sit down, and I asked them and I went around and asked all of them to tell me what they would like me to change about myself to make this better. And, it was just like putting myself on the spot to kind of say, okay, how can I make this better? But I think what I did was I just made the classroom feel like home. And I went beyond just the academic setting, like just the way it was set up. Also, like the kids had a place they could relax. They had a place like there was a library where they saw themselves. Also, they during lunch they could come up to the classroom also where they could relax, take some time. Um, it was also with the trips that we took, it was getting them to teach the classes sometimes. So it just became this space where they realized that, you know what, I could be myself here. And I also invited a lot of times also I invited the families over. And the 7 kids I had who were homeless, a lot of times they were afraid to come to the building because they felt that a lot of them were also undocumented. So they were afraid that, am I going to have to show ID? But I think just by being accepting of who they are, but also the way the kids were able to speak to them about this is what we can do in this classroom. I think it gave them that sense of security that I can be okay here. And also helping them find the help that they need when it comes to being outside. Because I think I always saw a school as a community setting. So it's not just limited to the classroom, but, we can help people find jobs. We can help people find resources. We can do all these things that can show that we can really be a beacon in this community. And one thing that we did also that the kids enjoyed was when I asked everyone to bring a dish from their culture. So I got to try Yemeni rice for the first time. It's amazing. I wanted to know what the spices were. It's like, what is this? This is, can I have some? But it was such an array like that. I remember that day so well. Like we had Dominican food, we had Yemeni food, we had food from Bangladesh, we had food from Puerto Rico, and it was all just next to each other. And then everyone got to try each other's food, but also they got to really see, kids are visual learners, most of them are, so they got to really see what the food looks like. They also got to see how similar their foods were like and how different their foods were like. So you had a parent from Puerto Rico speaking to a parent from Bangladesh. That's two on the other side of the planet, meeting together in this one room discussing dishes. And they were talking about, oh, well, what would a Puerto Rican Bengali fusion look like? I was like, I don't know, but
I'll try it.
I'll be there. So it was just, I realized creating that safe space can be difficult, but I think it's also realizing that, it's about stepping back and letting them have their voices and let their voices carry that room. And a classroom can be protective of a child. It can amplify a child's voice. At the same time, it can be detrimental to a child's future. And that's something that we need to really understand, how much power we have as educators in the classroom, that we can make this a safe space for them, or we can make this the worst place that they want to be. But when I have a kid telling me that, I had kids telling me that they would rather sleep on the subway because it's safer. When I have kids telling me that they sleep with scissors under their pillow because they want to make sure that they keep their family safe, I have to take that into consideration and understand that homework is not the priority right now. I need to make sure that they understand what is going on here. I had one child who missed the bus and came, Roylin. He missed the bus and came to the classroom, and he showed up at school starts at 8:30. He showed up at 10 o'clock drenched. And the first thing he did was come straight to my desk. He opened his book bag and he handed me the homework. When he did that day, I just thought, okay, I need to revamp this. This is not this is not sustainable. I need to recreate the way I'm doing this classroom. And I was able to still have the conversation with the other fifth grade teachers and some of the other teachers, but our school was very data driven. It was always, where's the data? Where's the rigor? Where's the data? Where's the rigor? But my family has told me that just because of the way I speak, sometimes I like to hold things in too much, but sometimes I like to kind of push things too much. And it was a principal in Brooklyn who actually told me her stance was always ask for forgiveness, not permission. So I always pretty much did that in the classroom a lot. And I know that's hard for a lot of people because when it comes to administration, it can be difficult. And my principal was not the most supportive, but my assistant principal was. So I kind of finagled my way that way. But it was always where, oh, really? I can't teach about this? Really? I can't teach about that? But the kids got it already. And I was able to scaffold from there. And then, every time, like we got to amplify Asian voices, we got to amplify African-American voices, we got to amplify Black voices. But what I did there also was I did not limit it to February for Black voices. I did not limit it to May for Asian voices. I did not limit it to October for Hispanic voices. We did it all year. So kids learn in sequence. So I told them that I have an issue with Black History Month. I have an issue with Asian History Month and all that, because every time we locate it to that one time and then we never talk about it again. And we're in a school that is diverse, so we can't do that. So, I used Newsy I used Teaching Tolerance. I used all these different resources to help me really create that fully inclusive classroom. And the kids felt safe that this can be a space for me, that though that it's in, I can never be in their shoes. I don't know what it's like to not have a home. Okay. So this is something where, but I can do my best to make sure that my classroom can be some type of home for them. And I think I did that with those years with them.
That was so moving to hear, Jan. And I think that, thinking about the classroom, as you said, a safe space or not a safe space is something that's in our hands too, as a community, as schools, as educators. I think, Jeremy, you had a great point in the chat that I wanted to highlight real quick, where you said we can't talk about education without directly addressing poverty. Community schools and wraparound services are an amazing model. And I think that that's really what our efforts need to be focused on in advocacy and education is culture responsive education, inclusive curricula, and also making schools be the hubs for social services, wraparound services that are so critical. And, I think Jeremy also mentioned that was also off Natasha's point as well. Absolutely. And I think there are a few other, right, Natasha says here, NYC and New York State need to invest more in community schools as a way to support school communities. And I think that model is something that needs so much more attention. Our schools could be a hub for services from healthcare to food pantries, to so much more that we could make our schools for parents or families. And that's ultimately the way that we build community too, is to see the schools as a point of organizing as well. And I feel like you've heard it best from Natasha, from Jan, from Jeremy. And I think that's the work really ahead of us too as a school system. And I just feel fortunate that we were able to hear from such incredible educators, organizers, and advocates today who are doing this work every single day. So I wanted to thank Natasha, thank you, Jeremy, thank you, Jan, so much too. This was really such a moving discussion. I really appreciate it. Please check out all the links that are in the chat as well. Thank you all for joining tonight. I know I went a little bit later too, but I do appreciate you all staying on and for really the moving discussion we had. Thanks to the three of you too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing us together.
Of course. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Shekar.
Take care.